I'll start by saying good afternoon to everyone and hope everyone's still doing well out there. And welcome to the 7th episode of the City of Creeks Learning Series. Today, Matt Boger, the manager over the Pond Inspection and Dam Safety Group in EMC, will be presenting on the purpose of stormwater control measures and the impact they make on our city to improve water quality and reduce flooding. And this talk marks a shift from our previous conversations in the series that provided more of a big picture scientific framework of watershed function. And now we're moving into more of the specific applications and challenges that we face as a department. So I'll look forward to jumping in and learning together. And without further ado, Matt, go ahead and take it away. Thanks.
Hey, thanks, Ryan, and thanks to everybody. All right, so as Ryan said, my name is Matt Boger. I'm the manager of our Pond Inspection and Dam Safety Group, and I'm really excited to sit here and talk to you all today about kind of what we do and some of the challenges that we're facing. First, I wanted to just acknowledge everybody that helped me put this presentation together. I really appreciate everyone reaching out and offering to help, and thanks a lot for this. So with that, let's go ahead and get started, and hopefully we can get you some information that you find interesting. I always really like to start with, why are we doing this? And the overall theme here is, as our city of Austin expands, so does our inventory of SCMs. And so it's the nature of the beast. And so our stormwater control measures, we need to look at some of this. So why are we doing this? Stormwater control measures, or ponds, they improve water quality and reduce flooding at their core. I mean, that's the purpose. But also we have a regulatory requirement to inspect and enforce on the private property owners if need be, and then to maintain our own assets that Watershed owns and maintains. These are some of the code citations. There's others obviously as well that kind of lay out the basis for these programs. So water quality standards set out in the Land Development Code in the chapter 25.8. So anyway, here's some of the Land Development Code citations that kind of lay out the regulatory framework for what we're trying to do. Just to kind of give a brief picture of what we're looking at here, this picture here is the city of Austin. That's actually not the whole jurisdiction, but everything in blue is a commercial pond. And then these ones in yellow are the residential ones. So obviously they're all over town, ETJ. We have about 8,300 commercial ponds, 1,050 on the residential, and about 265 of these Barton Spring Zone operating permits is what this stands for. And we're going to get into each one of these programs a little bit. The commercial ponds are on a the residential, we are on an annual inspection cycle, so we're hitting every one of these on an annual basis, or that's the goal. And then the Barton Springs operating permit, at a minimum, these are annual, but a lot of the technology, specifically the retention irrigation technology, gets multiple inspections a year. Kind of a breakdown, we have 11 inspectors in the staff, 6 commercial, 3 residential, and 2 Barton Springs Zone currently. So I thought this was kind of funny, how did we get here? These are some of the different ordinances. Started all the way back in 1974 with the Waterway Ordinance, and then if you're a Dolphins fan, you'll be happy to see your Miami Dolphins won the Super Bowl that year. Same thing, so we got the Lake Austin, Barton Creek, Williamson, and the Lower Watershed Ordinance, and Pittsburgh, and the Raiders respectively winning the Super Bowls in 1980 and 1981. And then you got 1986, Comprehensive Watershed Ordinance, 1991, Urban Watershed, 1992 is the Save Our Springs Ordinance, which has a lot of effect on our Barton Spring Zone operating permit. And then in 2013, we had the Watershed Protection Ordinance. And then respectively had the Bears, Giants, Washington football team, and the Ravens win in these years. And for those of y'all that know me, I'm a huge Vikings fan. And if you notice, they don't have their logo on here. So maybe next year. The point being is that we've been doing this a long time, and each one of these are kind of laying the groundwork and foundation to build upon each other to improve our water quality and reduce erosion, etc. I'd like to just start with how do we get here? How does a pond end up, or SCM end up in our inventory? This is just a cover sheet of a typical construction plan. This is called a C8 plan. Basically, that's the type of plan that for construction of a subdivision. But we have some review that's conducted on SCMs that are in the Barton Springs operating permit. So on the front end, we have some review touch points where we're looking at some of these plans before they're permitted to make sure that they meet code and criteria. And then new developments, usually 3 mechanisms. It's either a SP, which is a site plan, usually for commercial development. You have a C8, as I mentioned, is the residential, or this could be roadway projects, but usually public infrastructure. And then the GP is a general permit, a different type of mechanism to get construction projects built. Our pond inspection group, pond inspection dam safety, we have some oversight during construction. In the Barton Springs zone, they have oversight from cradle to grave on these ponds. So, and then on the residential side, we do warranty inspections as well during the construction period to make sure that we're getting assets that are going to be functional whenever they're in our groups to maintain. So, and then on the commercial end, every new asset that passes final inspection, it gets put into GIS, which in turn makes it an asset in Maximo for us to inspect. I'd like to just kind of lay this out there to just kind of show some typical layouts of how these ponds work and some different types. So this is a single phase pond. Basically, it's got a single basin. There's a few different types that work this way, detention and rain garden, some retention irrigation ponds. But basically, you have water that's coming into an inlet structure being conveyed through either overland or piped. This inlet structure usually has a splitter weir in here that sets the elevation for water quality elevation. And then if it is too much, it'll go to a flooding basin or out to the creek. Water comes in. There's an outlet structure. If it's a detention pond, there's usually some orifices here, different holes that are cut out at different elevations to slow this water down and meter it as it is getting out of the SCM. And then typically there's an emergency overflow if it's here or sometimes it's in the splitter box. This is kind of a dual phase. It's basically, this is what we would consider a full sedimentation filtration, meaning that water still comes in that same inlet structure with the weir. But there's two different basins. So there's a first basin here with a concrete separator wall. This is the sedimentation basin. This will hold the whole water quality volume of the whole asset in this basin, and then it'll filter through this riser pipe into the second basin, which has the sand and filtration for the water quality, and then out. Sometimes you'll hear full sedimentation and partial sedimentation filtration ponds. The partial just means it has a rock gabion wall instead of the concrete wall here, and then the water quality volume will go across both basins at once instead of just one. And this is a typical wet pond layout. Same thing, you got water coming in, inlet structure, you have a sediment bay, which is basically the first location to have sediment, trash, pollutants drop out. There's a interior separator berm usually, and this is all planted with different wetland plants and aquatic plants that are doing biological processes to remove the pollutants from the water that's coming in here. And these typically have a permanent pool. So usually they're always wet. So after it goes through there, there's usually a pipe through this to the main pool. And then same thing, there's the outlet structure. This is usually an inverted pipe to set the elevation of the pond. And then there's an emergency spillway. So in general, water and pollutants in the first bay, capture it here, filter it into the second one, and then overflow for detention purposes. So that's a really brief breakdown, but that's kind of just how each one of these work. So I'm going to go into each one of these just briefly, the different programs. The Barton Springs operating permit is a permitting program for water quality ponds in the Barton Springs zone, this area here. So basically new developments, commercial developments, privately maintained that are going to be built in this area are subject to this operating permit. There's some caveats. There's some grandfathering from basically if you platted your land before the Save Our Springs rules and these operating permit rules came into effect, you could be out of this. But in general, most of this area is subject to the operating permit. It's a cradle to grave permit that basically it's from the time it ends construction and then in perpetuity. Just going to show you a little bit of some of the projects that Barton Springs zone. So this is new construction of a water quality pond going in. So this is an impermeable liner, a geomembrane liner that's being attached to concrete walls to be basically hold the water quality volume in this basin. They also added filtration, sand filtration basically. This is a retention irrigation pond. So you can see that they put in the liner first, they put in the sand filtration, they work their way from the far corner out as they're creating this. And then the idea or the purpose of this is to make sure that this thing holds water. And so in this particular system, this is what we would call a leak check. Typically we wait for a large enough rain that will fill the basin, and then we'll turn off the equipment or the inspectors will turn off the equipment so they can see, is it holding water? And so there's only one way for the water to get out in these. It's through the pump equipment. So we do some monitoring to make sure it's holding water on new construction. It's a little bit different animal. This is post-construction. So this is a site that's been in operation for over a decade, but it was determined through inspections that the basin couldn't hold water. It was leaking and it needed a new liner. It's really the only way to fix it. After documenting this and issuing violations, working with owner and engineers, the inspectors were able to convey that, look, this isn't holding water. Here's some options. And so they decided to come back in and put in a new liner on this existing system. I think this is a great picture because it's hard to see, but these are they're check valves. They're one-way check valves to basically isolate this basin from the rest of the system. We're trying to prevent leaking, and then there's storm sewers, et cetera, that are beneath the water quality volume that could leak. So trying to isolate that with these one-way check valves. And then you can see on the right-hand side, the liner going in, you have this anchor trench is where they anchor it into the soil berm above the water quality elevation. And then they put this protective geofabric over it. And then you come in with 18 inches of soil typically as protective cover over the liner to make sure to protect it from any penetrations. And then you'll sod or grass this to get grass growing. So just kind of a typical project. I wouldn't say typical, but it's a rehab project on a lot of these older systems that are failing infrastructure. I don't know the exact dollar amount on this, but these are not cheap. These are expensive repairs in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, I mean, it's not an easy task. I'm just shift briefly to the residential and dam safety team. So this is the team that coordinates with our other groups for ponds that Watershed owns and maintains. And so as you can see on the left, this is Palmer Dam, and this is on a pre-storm recon, basically the inspector for dam safety. If we know that we're going to get a large enough storm that could engage some of these ponds, who come out and take a look at this, notice this was blocked up, got with our field operations crews, and they're amazing, and we're able to just get out there and clear this so that this outlet can be functioning properly whenever this storm hits. I'm not going to go over all the ins and outs of this, but this is basically the pond inspection sheet that our inspectors use. On the residential side, we're giving condition ratings to all these different elements of the ponds in order to kind of get a larger picture of the condition ratings across the board. So on this side, basically, without dumbing it down too much, 3, 4, and 5 means that some sort of work needs to happen. 3 is light maintenance, 4 is heavy maintenance, and then 5 is it's completely failed, needs rehab. So we're really on the residential side, it's a lot about collaborating with other work groups. It's a cross-divisional and cross-departmental effort to get these SCMs addressed. And so our role is to basically identify the problems and then coordinate with the other groups to figure out what's the best way to get these addressed. We also make the work orders for our field operations crews. So we are working hand in hand with them to address these. And then I also feel like we have a role as being advocates for maintenance activities. So as the city expands, as the commercial and our own inventory expands, we have innovative technology that we're employing, which is great, but we also need to consider, and I think that we're doing a good job of this as a department, what are the maintenance and responsibilities for these types of SCM. So big shout out to Derek Hain to send over this short video of this thing. It's called a Menzie Muck. It's basically a excavator on wheels, and I'll let you take a look. And
Bitty spider ran down the one way. Down kind of rain, then the blood, they went brazen. Out kind of sun, to dry up all the rain. Back to the block panel, look out on a Thursday.
I hope y'all can hear the music. But Derek and some of the FOD crews, the pond maintenance crews especially, they're trying to do a good job, and in my opinion, showcasing their work. I mean, this is a great 15-minute clip to just set to some music that showcases some of the work that they're doing, and also this pretty amazing piece of equipment that can help them and us get to hard to reach maintenance activities. Here's another one that he sent over. really good piece of equipment. This is actually that same Palmer Dam, different time, but clearing out the debris that's getting clogged up on this outlet. So big shout out to them. And then we also have coordination with other groups within Watershed. Local flood group, now in PDD, but David Trujillo and Pam Kierfoot's group. This is a dam called Mearns Meadow. It's a large regional detention pond that is considered a TCQ dam. Their group was working on modernizing this dam, upgrading it, and as part of that, we coordinate to get some of the maintenance items addressed that needed to as part of the dam safety program. So, just big shout out to them for being so willing to work with us and to incorporate some of our needs into their projects. So I think this is a huge success story. Same here. This is working with another group within Watershed, formerly the Water Quality Group, but again in project delivery. This is Tom Frankie and some of his colleagues. This is a wet pond at a subdivision, Quintera, where through either, I don't know if it's design or just how it was built, but this emergency overflow had obviously failed. And so we had identified this as a problem, but at the time, originally we were trying to have our field operations crew do this, but in general, this was kind of above and beyond their capability to do in a timely manner. And so Tom sponsored this project and with others and used the IDIQ, which is indefinite duration, indefinite quantity contractor that we have basically on retainer to come in and fix this outfall. So this is called Fleximat. It's a concrete that's laid out with vegetation is allowed to grow in between it, and it basically locks this all in place with these limestone block outfall. So basically it went from this outfall that was failing, wasn't working to this new design that's working properly in a nice, beautiful wet pond that's been reinforced, but has also kept some of its natural characteristics. As I talk about the commercial inspection and move to our enforcement side, this is just a video that I got the other day I thought was relevant. This is something that we get fairly recently, and I feel is an important part of our job.
Okay, the water's reached my patio now. That retention pond is flooded over, coming to my backyard. There's a stream coming straight from the retention pond.
So this is a homeowner who sent in a video. It lives next to a pond that was not functioning properly. And so basically the outlet had been clogged, and so it was overflowing in a way that it shouldn't have been. Some of the berms were low. This to me is when people ask me, what do you do for the city, or how do you make an impact with our tax dollars? I mean, this is, in my opinion, a great example. I mean, this is a situation where this pond wasn't working right. Homeowners were getting flooded. We were able to, through our commercial inspection and enforcement program, issue violations and work with the neighboring property owner to get it rebuilt and fixed. And I got some pictures I'll show you of it here in a second. But yeah, this is fairly typical on the commercial side. So this is a pond where obviously the berm had wasn't functioning. So they'd gotten written notice of violations. The way it works is it's kind of a 3-strike process. You get a first notice of violation, you get 60 days to address it. You get your second notice of violation, another 60 days, and we can assess a reinspection fee. And then at the third notice of violation, basically we can take it straight to court if we need be. I feel like this is a great project, a kind of example of sometimes the scope of these is pretty daunting. So this is actually the Austin Housing Authority is the owner of this. It's some apartments over on St. Elmo. And this is a wall that is a wall for their detention pond. So it's like a stacked rock wall, mortared wall that had failed. And then as a result, this is kind of the same design on the other side. This is actually their biofiltration pond here that was having trouble draining. And so it was kind of a perfect storm of this wall had failed, this wall was about to fail, and this SCM right here was having trouble working. And so they had gotten some violation notices. They were about to go to court, but they ended up not going to court because they ended up hiring contractors, engineers, and fixing the problem. So this is a bird's eye view from a drone that the contractor, but I think it's a pretty good view to show kind of the scope of the new wall going in. So here's the wall before, here's that new wall going in here. This is that biofiltration pond that they're going to have to come back in and they had to redo all of this, but they had to come in and do construction on this wall. This is that wall that had fallen down on the other side. So this wall right here, rebuilt, new outfall structure to the creek over here, and completed. And so again, I think this is some drone footage that they sent, but I think it shows just some of the scale of some of these projects that having to to fix some of these failing infrastructure. Again, this was an expensive project for them to fix. Yeah, it's just some drone video kind of showing the overall size and scope of this repair for these two walls in this biofiltration pond. So there's wetland mitigation that they're going to have to come back and replant. There's a lot of different moving parts on this particular project. But again, I feel like this is a success story. This is a pond that had been under violations for a while, had not been functioning, and now it's back up and running. We're just waiting to come and plant the plantings back into it and to finish it up. So I'm just going to show you just one more time. But in general, this, again, got a new wall in there. They had to coordinate getting building permits on this wall. There was a lot of different steps in order to get this completed. So, but again, I think this, in my opinion, it helps me remember what we're doing and why we're trying to do it. And kudos to the contractor for taking these videos and being reputable and taking care of this work. And I think it kind of shows a good success story. I'm not going to get too much into the MS4 permit, but I do want to just mention some of it. Julie White is going to be presenting on the MS4, and I'm not going to steal any of her thunder for next week, but I just want to mention that, here's a picture of our front of our permit. That MS4, it stands for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer. Every municipality over a certain size is 100,000 people for a large phase 1 MS4 is what we're considered. We have to create what's called a stormwater management plan, and then there's control measures. And our group, the pond inspection, we're part of the control measures 1 and 2 for post-construction inspection, and then our maintenance inspection and activities. So I'm not going to go into that anymore. I'm going to let Julie go over it in depth next week, and looking forward to that. So just going to briefly go into some of the challenges that we're facing, and then we'll have some time, hopefully, to have some question and answer. And kind of our role, I feel like, is to not just identify these problems, but let's work with the others in watershed and within the city and our other stakeholders to come up with some solutions. One thing I've really realized since being over in watershed is we have an abundance of resources. If we need, we can figure these problems out. It's just a matter of taking the time and getting the stakeholders involved. So just briefly, I have groundwater intrusion here. Really, it's unknown water sources coming into a pond. We're in the process of working with our aquifer science and the water quality compliance group to address some of these. We're going to identify the sources, and then we can look at it from a regulatory standpoint as to what's the best way to address these. Underground ponds are a challenge just because you can't see them. They're built out underground. They're confined space. There's reporting requirements that are part of that. It's just a challenge. And as we expand as a city, as we try to create more density, we're seeing more and more go underground. So it's just a challenge that we're coming across. Leaking stormwater liners and just failing infrastructure in general. I mean, a lot of these ponds are SCMs. They're 30, 40 years old now and starting to need some major rehab. And then, as I briefly mentioned earlier about just the growing inventory that we have and complexity. And this is a discussion that we've been having, and I think it's important, just like if we have 8,300 commercial ponds, and even if you're only growing at 2% a year, it's still a lot. And so what do we do as we get into the tens of thousands of these, and what's the plan to balance the work with the need to improve water quality? So it's not that we don't want more ponds. It's one of our main tools that we use to improve water quality and reduce flooding. But we do have to balance that with how do we maintain these? How do we deal with our growing inventory from an inspection and mainly from a maintenance standpoint? And then just coordinating with other departments. And it's just a challenge. We work with Public Works and PARD, and there's a lot of other divisions, departments that are, have to build SCM for their project or have these that they maintain. So, and then lastly, just from an equity standpoint, this is something that we're trying to look at everything through an equity lens now. And we look at how are we spending our resources? Where are we spending our time? Some of this is regulatory driven. So there's parts of town that have additional regulations that we have additional resources spent on, but it's still worth the discussion about how do we spend our time and effort in an equitable way across the city. And then lastly, I'm just going to leave it with, the complexity. This is the interior of a control panel for a retention irrigation pond. So this is the control logic that runs the pumps and all the different things that they need to do for a retention irrigation pond. And so this is not simple. And there's a lot of things that could go wrong. I'm not saying that this is bad. I'm just saying that we have to look at the complexity of some of our systems and make sure that it works best for everyone involved. And this is just a tough design or something where they're trying to put a liner on this. The site has a liner, and this slope is just too steep to have the protective cover on it. So you see it sloughing off the liner into the basin here. The whole thing is built. They're trying to put in sod now. So these are just some of the challenges that we come across. This is one of those where the engineer and the contractor, they have to fix it, and the inspectors and our side of things, we just make that sure that it's going to meet the plans and specs, but it's a challenge. With that, I'll turn it over to comments, any questions. I didn't get a chance to look at the chat, but I hope that y'all found this informative and kind of thought-provoking as we look at how we manage our stormwater within the city.
Thanks, Matt. That's an excellent presentation. And really just such good insight on how these systems work to slow down and treat stormwater and the services that the pond inspection dam safety team provides to ensure that they're functioning properly. Thanks for the presentation. Everyone, we encourage you all here to ask questions, make comments. You can use the hand raise tool in the Teams chat, and we'll try to get to everyone's questions. There were some great ones in the chat. I'll start with a couple of those, and then I do see some hands already popping up. Shesh had the question of, do we have any ponds with floating skimmers?
Sure. I see, Frank, thanks for putting that on the chat. Typically, we only see those during construction, whenever they have to do dewatering of these ponds. Basically, when they have to, they're still working on the basin, but they need to pump the water out so that they can continue work. Don't really see skimmers as a permanent part of the control. Sometimes we see aerators, but not a lot of skimmers.
Great. Clayton had a question of how many ponds does your team find that are leaking or in need of repair, and expanding about that a little bit, just general maintenance requirements. What's the ratio that you find in compliance versus those that have corrective actions? And are these issues rare or more prevalent?
I would say that the leaking liners is a problem in the recharge zone. It's just something where these have been in the ground now, some of them for a while. And I'm sure our project delivery team, I know Charlie Ko and Tom and others, Lee, have done project new liners in some of these ponds that have failed for watershed. So I don't know the exact number, but it is an issue. But to the greater, I guess to the bigger question of like how many of these ponds of our inventory need some sort of substantial work, that's actually one of our performance measures that the field operations group reports it. But basically, we want to be operating with 90% of our ponds operating above or beyond their functioning properly, basically. And as of last month, we were basically at 92% we're operating. And that means, in reality, what that means is that they're not in a condition of a 4 or a 5, meaning that they need some sort of major rehab. They're still functioning. They may need some sort of vegetation maintenance or sediment maintenance or something, but it's still providing its function.
Anna asks if you track the costs associated with the repairs and maintenance of ponds, either on the commercial side or the residential side, or both.
On the residential side, definitely. Not my section, but if there's a new project that's putting in a new liner, et cetera, we definitely have costs for those, and it's expensive. And I think. And I appreciate y'all chiming in, Frank and others on the team putting in the chat. But yeah, it's expensive. On the commercial side, we don't have a say we don't have a say in how much the money it costs to do it. We vet what they're proposing to make sure it meets our criteria. But these repairs are expensive. So it's just a challenge that we're facing right now. And unfortunately, as a property owner, it's kind of the cost of business right now.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks, Matt. I'm wondering, you and I have talked about this a little bit, but just considering the proliferation of small scale stormwater infrastructure, rain gardens particularly, but even cisterns potentially, or other types of green stormwater infrastructure, how do you envision the pond inspection dam safety group responding to that kind of growth of these very relatively small but distributed little bits all over the landscape? Do y'all see a role in that?
Absolutely. Great question. We've done some analysis of this. There already are some small systems that we don't inspect in our regular rotation. They're on a complaint basis. That's how we report it on our MS4. But it is a question of there was this push, and I get it, about moving away from one large centralized control to a bunch of smaller localized controls. And the idea behind it, making sense, is if you have the one control goes down, the whole site is not getting any treatment. If you have 50 controls instead of that one, if one of them or two of them go down, you still have the other 48 working. Absolutely makes sense, and from an actual water quality treatment, that absolutely makes sense. But the question has to be asked. That's 50 new assets. And I guess to answer your question, we have there are some maintenance conference that we are a part of. We're actually hoping to go to one here in March where we talk with other cities about how they're doing this. There are other municipalities, definitely like the Chesapeake Bay area, that have more SCMs than we do. A lot of, like you're saying, small scale rain catching. They do a lot of self-reporting and auditing. That's how you have to go when you have tens of thousands of them. But no, it's a question that we're going to have to tackle as we continue to grow as a city.
Anna asked if we have a sense of how many ponds have been built in years prior, maybe in the last 10 years, or if you have an idea ahead in the future, what kind of rate of ponds are entering your program?
That's a good question. I actually looked, so Matt Westbrook and I gave a presentation similar to this a couple years ago. It was in 2017. And so I was just looking at the numbers for the commercial. So there were 7,900 commercial ponds in 2017, and now we're at 8,300. So 400 in the last 4 years. We're adding roughly 100 a year. So I don't know the exact percentage, but it's a decent amount, 5%. I think the residential single family is a smaller rate. It's a slower rate. But still, I mean, even if you add 1% a year, you're adding 10 to 15 ponds on the residential side. It adds up. So I think we're doing a great job as a watershed protection. Like the asset management plan, we've already gone through ponds, and we're looking at this. I think it's a question that every city across the nation is grappling with. What do we do with this infrastructure? How do we pick which ones to address first, and then how do we be smart about what we're doing going forward in the future? So, all good questions, and I don't think we have answers right now. I think that's part of the debate, and I hope y'all can help us come up with some of these solutions.
Shesh had another question from your last slide showing the image of the control system, and wondering what do all those lights and buttons and switches control? Are those controlling valves or pumps?
Yeah, so they're basically, some of it is there's like amp sensors or pressure sensors that are monitoring the pump to make sure it's not running when it shouldn't be. Basically, like if it's pumping when there's no water, that's bad. If it's pumping and it can't, there's like it's called a deadhead. It can't exit. There's a clogged valve or something. So there's some fail-safe equipment in there. And then, I mean, there's timers, there's delays, there's contactors. There's just a lot of different. It's basically it's a wastewater lift station, basically. I mean, that's really how it's a lift station that's moving water from a lower elevation to a different location. It has different criteria. The way it's not set up the exact same way, but the control logic. So don't get me lying about it. I don't know all the ins and outs. My inspectors, we work with contractors to explain some of this, but basically we vet it. Like it has to have an amp sensor. Show us that you have the amp sensor. Provide us with the O&M, the operation and maintenance manual that has the type, the specs. And it's not so much for us as the inspectors. It's really for when we have someone to come maintain it, we can give them the booklet, like here's the type of pump, here's the type of equipment. So they're not just shooting in the dark, trying to figure out what we got out here. But no, I mean, like I was saying, it's complex. It's a lot of moving parts. I don't know what else to say about it other than it's interesting.
As a segue to that, is there a particular type of SCM, stormwater control measure, that gives your team the biggest headaches?
I would, unfortunately, I mean, it is these ones with the pump panels. I mean, it in the Barton Springs zone, they just have the perfect storm of they're over the Edwards Aquifer, so they're subject to the liner rules, a lot of them. And then you have to comply with SOS, which means this non-degradation pumping regime, basically. So you just have, there's just so many different points there where something can go wrong. You could have a failing liner, you could have, just anything in the control equipment, anything in the irrigation equipment. So I kind of, my colleagues that I work with a lot here, I try not to dumb everything down. I'm always looking for what's the easiest way to get this done. And that's not necessarily the right way in every instance, but I think it's Occam's razor. The more things, the more moving parts, the more possibility for failure. And so it's a part of the conversation as we move forward. How can we improve this mousetrap, right?
Thanks, Matt. I want to close with a comment from Callie Gagnon, and I think this really gets at the essence of the vital role that the pond inspection dam safety team provides. Kelly says, shout out to Matt B. and his team for using all of their observations and findings to inform and improve our regulatory requirements for stormwater control measures being built in future development and redevelopment, working with Field Operations Division, engineers, scientists, and planning and policy teams to propose changes. And I think that really gets at the gist of what a central hub you are in this world for the department and for the community.
I wish I could do a blush emoji. Thanks, y'all. No, I mean, I think the work we're doing is important, and I hope that we can continue to improve. And thanks for the opportunity to share some of what we do with y'all today.